So I'm again thankful for the conversation we're having. Marlena Graves is with us. And where are you at right now, Marlena? What part of the country?
I am in Toledo, Ohio.
Okay. And Dennis, you're in where? In Chicago?
I'm just outside Chicago. I'm in one of the western suburbs called Lisle.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. And I'm down in Alabama where we're suffering with 75-degree weather and sunny. So, so
Uh,
if I could just have you all just introduce yourselves just a bit of where you are or what you're doing or the ministry that you're in, and maybe some of the things that you're working on in your writing, I would appreciate that. Marlena, I'll just start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I earlier this year, I'm no longer doing it, but I worked for the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, which is with migrant farm workers,
Wow.
a lot on immigration, and I was laid off due to budget cuts in February, but the Lord turned that out. It worked out. But in the past, I've been on staff at churches, nonprofits, and most of my life has been like a three-legged stool: the church, the nonprofit, and the academy.
Mm-hmm.
And at points in my life, I've been in all three. And I learned a lot. I've been working on immigration reform and interested in poverty for years. I mean, I grew up very, very poor. And part of the organizing committee, some of the beautiful things was that the migrant farm workers paid dues to help the communities where our offices were in. So for example, I was headquartered in Toledo, Ohio, and we did a lot with the churches, the African-American churches, on lead paint poisoning.
Okay.
Police brutality. And we actually got a code of conduct signed with the Toledo Police Department about how to treat people.
Wow.
So that the police don't do things that these
Amen.
citizens thought that they could do.
Yeah.
But right now, the Lord has a sense of humor, I guess, because shortly after I was laid off due to budget cuts, I found out that I got into a PhD program. So I'll be starting this fall in American Studies at Bowling Green State University. And I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I'm studying American cultural studies, and I'm very interested in the kinds of things we're talking about: evangelicals and race, immigration, poverty, and possibly how they treat women. You can only study so much. So, but I'm really grateful, and these are things that I think about a lot, especially when it comes to spiritual formation, because I don't think you can separate following Jesus, formation, and justice.
Yeah, good. And your new book that's coming out.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Among that, my next book is The Way Up is Down. It comes out July 14th, 2020. Mm-hmm. And from a theological perspective, I take a look at what kenosis, but emptying ourselves, would look like in everyday life. And I do talk a little bit about, you'll see, like what it would mean, how we treat the least of these if we were actually to live as Jesus lived today. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in July, I'm excited about it. And so I have things coming up.
Yeah, I'm excited about that book as well. It's a really good read and very challenging.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dennis, how about you?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm also happy to be with you both and to see Marlena kind of in person. I follow her on social media, so I appreciate this. Yeah, I'm a New Testament professor at North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago. I've been a pastor for a lot of years, for about 30 in urban settings, New York, DC, and then a few years in Minneapolis, where we crossed paths.
Yeah.
But along the way, I have been teaching New Testament as an adjunct for years, and then finally started to do it full time. In my urban experience, found myself in different ways trying to practice what I thought was a healthy sort of multiculturalism in church. and realize how hard that is. And maybe that's something we'll wind up talking about a bit more.
Yeah.
But as far as academic work, I'm currently working on, well, I have a book coming out in September called Might from the Margins. And the subtitle is The Gospel's Power to Turn the Tables on Injustice. And so examine a lot of issues related to centering the voice of marginalized people who are presumed powerless, but actually have power because of the gospel. And Marlena, your book on self-emptying, that sounds really intriguing to me. I'm actually contracted with InterVarsity to write a book on humility with InterVarsity Academic, and I like that title that you have. That was something I was a title that strikes me. I like that. The way up is down. That's really awesome. Anyway, so those are projects I've got working on. One coming out in the fall, and then some other things hopefully next year.
That's great. And I know with Marlena's book, The Way Up is Down, the thing that it's a lot similar to your theme. She gives examples. Marlena, I just love those examples of people who you'd think would be on the margins, but were empowered and gave out of their need. And just some amazing examples that way. So
that's awesome. That's exciting. I'm looking forward to reading that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Likewise, Dennis. And briefly, I just want to say, based on the work that you've talked about, you're doing and Daniel's interest, I'm like, who does Jesus make a beeline to? It's never the kings and queens of the world, and why? And why? So I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say about humility.
Yeah.
Thank you. Amen.
In your book. So this is exciting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, it's good to have this conversation. The reason I reached out to both of you for the conversation is over the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And then not long after that, what we learned of the murder of Breonna Taylor in that situation where I can't remember his boyfriend or husband, but we're in their house and police got the wrong address and busted in, and she was killed in the process. And those, but specifically with Ahmaud Arbery, and 2 months of doing nothing until a video was leaked, and then finally some movement on that, and it just raises up these deep issues that have not gone away in our culture and in our society. And so I just wanted to invite you all into the conversation because I have so deeply been impacted by both of your voices on social media. Dennis, your work and the work in Minneapolis that you did as pastor, and then your son, the artwork that he's put out has been so deeply impacting to me. And I just wanted to get maybe first just some gut reactions of when you first heard that story, and just some responses that you had. And whoever wants to start up can go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to defer to Dennis.
Well, I will start. I mean, I'm as a man and having 2 sons, I find myself so frustrated at these moments that it's hard for me to articulate my anger and frustration, and also a level of fear that I have, that for some reason Black bodies and often Black male bodies are intimidating to white people, and also the freedom that white people have to examine us, to scrutinize us, to speculate upon our actions. All of that. I didn't want to see the video. I wound up seeing it almost accidentally because it was on. I saw it, but I didn't plan on it, and it's traumatizing, and it's so. I think, so I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm just articulating my initial reactions: fear, anger, frustration, and also a bit of reluctance, I'll admit, to engage with some white folks, because I don't always feel that it's worth it to have conversations with folks who almost immediately start to make excuses for the people who perpetrated the actions, be they law enforcement or not. So those are some initial reactions that I have.
Yeah. Marlena, how about you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just emotional for me to see again. Not watch the video. I did think I saw a still on Twitter, but my first thoughts were like I thought of Botham Jean and his apartment in Texas. Just people with their cell phones, and at the same time, when I hear that and see that, I think, and I've said this before on Twitter, and this is nothing new. You've seen this said, but I mean these usually white guys that commit mass shootings, come out alive, or I just cannot. I can't see, as our brother Dennis said, defending that, people defending it, or saying, it was, defending it. And, it would be like, overseas people thinking, all white guys are mass shooters, because I went to South Africa last year, and people do feel like the United States is, a lot of people I had two people ask me that I did not know. One on the airplane was a medical doctor in the Netherlands, a heart doctor. He was Pakistani. And people in South Africa asked me, like, and they were, people of color, they feel like the United States is dangerous. That is what a lot of people, and they weren't the only two that communicated that sentiment to me. Of course, I don't know what they're watching or what kind of news they get, but as people of color, they're worried to go to the United States. A Pakistani doctor asked me if it was, and he's in the United States, he's practices in the Netherlands, but he asked me, now if you leave the big city, is it safe to leave the big city? I was like, well, it depends who you talk to. In some areas, I would say it's not even safe in the big city. And he's been to the United States many times. So I guess those were kind of all the thoughts swirling in my head, the mass shooting, people getting away with it. And then I did think about Botham Jean, like you can't even be an African-American man or woman in your own home.
Yeah.
And guiltless, and even if they did something wrong, there's lots of the mass shooters get off. So that was my initial reaction. And so.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. It is one of those things that, that just so deeply gets, into my soul that, the first real response from my wife and I, when we the first action we ever took to go to a protest or anything, was in the cities when Philando Castile was shot. And we went to a couple of rallies that were at the governor's mansion, and just to be a part and to listen and to mourn. It was just devastating to us. And to see this happen all over again, and to realize this is something that had been passed over by 2 or 3 prosecutors. No action was anywhere near being taken on this with Ahmaud Arbery. And it brought that anger back up in me, about what does it take for us to look at you, Dennis, and just say, I'm sorry. I'm hurt, and how do you, one of the things I just really want to learn from is, how do you see, is there any different reaction this time from the white church than from a previous time? Or is it
I'll
the
jump in.
same?
Well, I'll jump in quickly. My only way of assessing that is from social media. You know, I don't have, which years ago we didn't have, so it would have been
Sure,
harder.
that's true.
Would have been even harder to answer the question. But but I would say I've seen, at least in my circles, more of my friends, but maybe because they're in my circles, more who were willing to denounce. And I'll be careful here, not just the actions of these two, but denounce the energy that's behind it. And I think that that's the difference. Now, some of my friends saw it as the sinful actions of two men, or maybe three, the guy filming or whatever. And so for them, and a more evangelical mindset, the evil is that these two guys did something wrong, right? But more of my justice minded friends are saying, no, these two guys are simply a product of something that's deeper.
Yeah.
I'm seeing more people, not a lot, but I'm seeing more people willing to acknowledge that there's something under the surface that allows for not only the actions of these, but also, Dan, as you mentioned, the delay and even bringing any kind of action from law enforcement on these guys. So for me, that's good that I do see that. And maybe that's always been there, but it's not always been enough to energize people to change things. There's been lament, there's been frustration, there's been maybe sadness of some sort, but it doesn't always turn into wanting to change the system and upset the apple cart. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's more than you asked, but
no, that's perfect. I really appreciate that. Marlena, how about you?
I don't know.
Sure.
As Dennis would say, I do agree that there are friends that that do say things on social media, and not only say things, but protest or call their, senators and other people. And I guess I have to say I'm in agreement with Dennis. I am thinking of one person on my Facebook page who, I'm sure he would admit he always disagrees with me about everything when I say stuff, and he lets me know. And I love the brother.
Yeah.
I mean, he said that was wrong, and I was really impressed because we don't think the same about hardly anything. So I was happy about that. I mean, I love the man. And if he watches this, he'll know who he is, because I mean, I do love him. But he said, this is wrong. And I was, and happy to see that. I think a lot more people are starting to move slightly. And I say this from social media. And I would like to challenge anyone who's watching or listening to this that, we always wonder what we would have done during the Holocaust, or if we lived in Germany, or during slavery, or some of us may have lived during Jim Crow, but what would we have done then? And we like to think where we do the heroic and right thing, but I think our actions and words now will betray what we might have done. Of course, it's hard to know because we weren't there back then under different circumstances, but maybe what we do and how we live now is a good measurement.
Yeah.
And the worst thing we could do is, and I'm talking to Christians, is to say, well, that was back then, we don't have these problems anymore. Because then people could admit, segregation and other things. They can look back in history and admit that it's wrong. But for all of us, it's hard to see the present sometimes. It's easier looking back. But I challenge people to listen to their African-American brothers and sisters when they tell them, when they bear witness, and not dismiss them.
Right.
Else for that matter, or anyone else, any victims of injustice.
Right. Amen.
Yeah. I will freely admit to both of you that I think about that exact question. Would I be hesitant? And if it were the Civil War if it were, you know, I got to hear John Brown and listen to his abolition speeches or something like that and go, well, I wonder if I, and I have to, I just go, wait a minute, what am I doing now? And it really, I asked that question of myself, and it really gets to me.
I appreciate that. But the irony is we live in a country that for many people, they would claim it to be a Christian country, or at least have some kind of Christian value of some sort. So you would not think it would be an act of bravery to do the right thing, because there would be so many others that would share that same view. So my cynicism, and hopefully it's not cynicism, but I think I might be right, is that whatever we're calling Christian is not fundamentally, lining up with what the way of Jesus.
Right.
That's a roundabout way of saying there's a lot of hypocrisy. I mean, I just say because otherwise there would be an awful lot of strength in numbers. But think about it. The part of the country that was known for having the most religiosity, right? What we used to call the Bible Belt. This is the place that's also known for patriarchy, sexism, and racism. I mean, I don't think that's by accident. I think that people who can claim this zeal for God and for Jesus are also the same people who give into white supremacy. They're not separating their nationalism from their religiosity. So I would like to think it wouldn't be heroic, but it really is heroic to stand up against the tide, because it's just not the way of our world.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that I'm just trying to wrestle with in my own mind, is that dichotomy I had in the past on just the word justice. That it was in the past, the white sentimentality of, you've done wrong, now I will punish you to make it right. Instead of justice being someone is without, and I now have now with my knowledge, knowing this, I need to bring in what is good. I need to bring in shalom. I wrestle with that dichotomy, and I see it, more readily, but it's just taken me a long time to bring those together. And part of it is just listening to your voices and trying to bring in as many of those voices as I can to understand that wholeness that is there, which that leads me to the next question. If I could ask both of you, and I know Marlena, this is important as well in the work with immigration, and refugees and those kinds of things, is this term of with me being a white guy and all of the baggage I talk about, this is the pushback I'll get. I will say it's not enough for me to say I'm not a racist. What I have to say is I'm anti-racist. And I was wondering if you could help unpack, because that's still a term I'm working with and trying to learn more about. And I was wondering, and then the other thing is the term whiteness, and in separating that out, because I know my first reaction, wait a minute, I'm white. I can't do anything about that, but I can do something about my whiteness. And I was wondering if you two, in those terms, just if could unpack that a little bit more. Anti-racist and whiteness.
Again, I'll defer to Dennis first, and then I'll go from there.
Sure. Well, I think the language that we use is part of it, and language is important. But I would say that people have been arguing for a long time that the way we look at the world, I mean, it's an ideology. So now I think people are feeling freer to name that ideology as whiteness. And and that one can be complicit in that even if their skin is not white. In other words, it's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of deferring to power. It's a way of assuming that dark is bad. There are people of color who've been taught. I mean, I'm in my late 50s, and I grew up in an era where it was just kind of ingrained in us that dark and black is bad. I mean, and so there's that way of thinking is whiteness that we can become victims of, or even perpetrate ourselves. I mean, but I don't want to get too far afield, but it's an ideology, right?
Okay.
So anti-racism is a good way of saying, because there's a lot of folks who would say, oh, I'm not a racist. And what they mean, I think, is that I don't harbor any personal prejudice toward someone.
Right.
And I think that the work that's been done in the last, maybe couple of decades, people have been helping us to understand that racism is also about ideology and power, and not just about personal prejudice.
Yes.
It's animated in some way. So it's not, because one could hide their biases. I mean, we saw this before the 2016 election. People had tamped down their biases, but after the 2016 election, they were free to articulate them. Yes. So they were there. So the idea of anti-racist is not about personal bias. It's about actively changing a mentality and an ideology. So it's about working against the power structures that were dehumanized. It's about trying to get people to think differently. So I would say it's more than just a personal conversion, like we would say in church. Somebody get converted, then then all is good. Their sins are gone. The idea is it's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of being. It's a different ideology. So that's my thoughts about those things. Oh, and I'll mention a reference, because the term anti-racist has come up in writings a lot. So Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is out, and he wrote one earlier on the sort of the history of slavery in the Americas, called Stamped from the Beginning. And he's a historian, and then he's followed up with this big book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I think so I want to mention those as resources, because they get at the this ideology, right? It's a way of being, a way of thinking.
I appreciate that. Marlena?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Dennis has hit the main points. It strikes me how it's easy for us, and sometimes very ill-informed, but I'll say that, but to say, oh, I see corruption in other countries, or that regime, or I'm not going to name a cause, but
sure,
people go overseas to and can more readily see oppression in other places. Difficult for them to see it here because of that, because that whiteness and white supremacy and the culture is like the sea that we swim in almost. So it's hard to evaluate. And so I think it's really important, and I think about scripture, and I'd love to hear if Dennis, I mean, he's a New Testament scholar, which I am not, so I'd like to hear your opinion about what I'm about to ask you. But for thinking about scripture, when Jesus says, when Paul says in Roman, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. And I talked to my students about this in our discipleship class. If you're going to confess in the Roman Empire that Jesus is Lord, in this Dennis's area, it could cost you your life. It's not just some individual prayer that you make in your heart. I mean, yes, you have to believe in your heart, but in your soul. But if you say, I'm going to follow Jesus, if Jesus is Lord, then there are implications to that.
Yeah.
What are the implications in the first century? I mean, Dennis could tell you more, that Jesus is Lord. There was a lot of them. and you couldn't go worship the way you used to and go to the gods or pay homage to the gods. And then if you didn't, the people are going to think, hey, you are making our God mad, and it's your fault that we have a drought or a crisis or a plague. Saying that Jesus is Lord has real world implications. Yeah. It's not some theology. A lot of people are, I think will find themselves in torment. Good theology, but Jesus says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say?
Amen.
So, no, we could have the most pristine of the theology, and Jesus would argue with the Pharisees about that. They had pristine theology, but I believe it's in Matthew 23 or 24. He says, woe to you, you make people twice the sons and daughters of hell as you are. And so I think that anti-racism, as you were thinking about, Daniel, and Dennis was talking about, is putting our theology into action, and are about justice. And I want to wrap this around, and I don't see what Dennis thinks, but and this is where I am not studied, but I've heard from the Roman Catholic Church, which I love their their social thing, and but theology, the word justice and righteousness are the same thing, or basically tied together.
Same word.
Yeah, same word, right? So we like to say, righteousness, but you could also use the word justice.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And what if where you saw the word righteousness, put the word justice, because people like to dismiss people that use the word justice or say anti-racism as those liberal people. And the question is, do you read your Bible?
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I haven't studied it, but I'm really fascinated that justice and righteousness are the same word.
Man, well, Sister Marlena, you said an awful lot, and I really appreciate it. And just one quick example. I mean, even when we read the Beatitudes, blessed are those, blessed in the first part of Matthew 5, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Doesn't that change the way you think about it? Because those who are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, it sounds like, somebody over there wants, somebody who wants those people over there to do the right thing. But hungering and thirsting for justice means I need deliverance. I want people to do something that's right and to set things that are not right and make them right. And I'm hungering for this. I mean, just think of how many oppressed people throughout our world, throughout society, have been hungering and thirsting. The nice thing is that Jesus says they're blessed because they will be satisfied. But the reality of it, we need justice.
Yeah. What about
it's not an individual thing. It's not individual, like
That's
self-righteousness. Justice for the oppressed. And what was Jesus's mandate when he read? I have was it quoting Isaiah?
Luke, right? That's right. That he's come to set captives free. That's right.
Yeah. One of the hardest things for me in pastoring, especially after the ordeal with the Philando Castile, was I would just get really upset with people because I would talk about justice, and then they would come back to me and get on me for preaching social justice. And I'm like, I didn't even use the word social. I used justice, and it's just we've so contorted these such meaningful words that.
But Dan, is there justice that's not social?
Exactly.
Okay. I was. Sorry.
Well, no, it's just that they want to use it in the political sense, where they can excuse it now because they put social and justice together and make it a liberal issue, rather than justice. And what I was trying to get people to realize is this is a wholeness. This is a community. You deal with the community, and that was just a concept that just wasn't sinking in so quick. So
I get that. Well, I've throughout my ministry time too have people get upset and they say something's political or pastors being political. I honestly used to not be sure what they meant, and it would make me uncomfortable because I thought, oh, did I do something wrong? You know, and I would second guess myself. I think what they meant was partisan,
Yes.
in that it didn't fit their particular views of things, because, you know, our actions in the world are inherently political. I mean, it's what Sister Marlena said. If you say Jesus is Lord, you're saying Caesar is not. That's a political statement. You've now said your allegiance is to someone other than the one in charge. So when Paul tells the Philippians, your citizenship is in heaven, then it's a statement about our allegiance. And I find sometimes Christians in America are sort of selective about where they put their allegiance, depending on who's the president. You know, sometimes that person, that's where my allegiance is. Sometimes that's no, our allegiance is in heaven. And so that's inherently a political statement, because it means I am not bound to do or be what society might want me to do or be. So, but it does mean my work for God in the world will impact the systems of the world.
Right.
I mean, not to get too preachy, but just think about Ephesians with principalities and powers, that language in Colossians 2. These principalities and powers may be demonic forces, but they have real world implications. Yeah. I mean, that's whiteness. It's one of the principalities and powers that has real world implications. If Christ defeats those, then we are to be living in concert with that, as people who don't bow to the principalities and powers.
Yeah. I really appreciate that feedback, and just those perspectives. Again, these are the things that just really drive my thinking, and to be able to be in conversation with folks to help keep moving that message forward is really what I'm striving for. How do we move forward in a moment like this? And I know I so appreciate both of you saying there has been a little bit different reaction, but the emphasis on little, and I appreciate that emphasis too, because I feel the same way. But there has been some movement. But in this moment, as hard as it is to hear, what do we do to keep moving forward? I want to keep listening. What do we need to do to keep moving forward in understanding these cultural issues, these big block issues that have not gone away, like racism and the fear that, especially among Black men, that's there, and immigrants, as well.
I wanted to say a couple things that go with this question, and I'll try to be very brief. But in 2018, when they had that zero tolerance policy separating the children from families, I said, God, I have to do something, but I have no money, no power. So what do I do? But the Lord told me, use what you do have. And I thought to myself, okay, what do I have? Well, I know a lot of writers, and I have Twitter. And so I drafted a letter. I got people to help me, some writer friends like Tish Harrison Warren, Amy Julia Becker, Michelle Warren, who's with CCDA, ran for Senate in Colorado, professors. But my problem was, how am I going to get people to care about this? A lot of people don't know any migrants. I mean, basically what I'm saying is proximity. So this has to do with moving forward. But I thought to myself that the reason why I think our white brothers and sisters who are really vocal and active when it comes to being anti-abortion, or some people say pro-birth, is because everyone can relate to a mother or a sister or a baby.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
And so I thought if I could find that connection, then I could reach out to people that normally wouldn't care about this. But the thing with the zero tolerance policy, mothers and parents, people could kind of have empathy seeing families torn apart. And so I'm like, I need to mobilize women. I'll start with women, then we'll see if other people will get excited. And it worked. What am I saying here? I think a lot of our lack of care for things is because we can't relate to it. Yeah. People don't know people of color. People don't live in their neighborhoods. We are removed. We're not proximate. You could say that could be me, that could be my brother, my sister. I'm not saying this is the only thing. I'm just saying this is one thing. Yeah. Michelle Warren wrote that book, The Power of Proximity. A lot of people talk about it. Being near to these primary resources. Like, if I didn't do anything with immigration, like if I didn't talk to people, go to where they are, I'm like, let someone else who knows what they're talking about do it, right? Talk from my perspective because I live with, talk, help, whatever, people, and I have some insight. I don't think, but I know something. And so my encouragement to people, and again, thank you, Daniel, for this, would be intentional about not using people. Don't instrumentalize people of color. But like you said, go listen, like Mary, sit at the feet of. And I think that would change the world. And also, the last thing I want to add to something that Dennis said about, being political, not being partisan. I mean, one reason Jesus was crucified, right, is because the high priests were like, it's better that one man died than that take over the whole nation. The implications of Jesus's life was to bring die for our sins and to bring forth his kingdom, to start making all things new, and upends the social order, because how Jesus treated women. I mean, he didn't come out and be like, not everything changed in an instant, but a lot of people didn't like Jesus because of how he treated women and the prostitutes and sinners. The implications of the gospel will upend the demonic social order.
Yeah, amen.
The things in high places.
That's good.
If you're gonna follow Jesus, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say, is what what Paul says in Romans 12:1-2. We need our minds to be transformed. We need to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, and use our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Right. But our mind is transformed by being close to, by sitting at the feet of listening to the testimony of, then we'll be transformed. But we need to take our thoughts about things, like we talked about anti-racism, and move them into action. So the challenge would be for people listening or watching that pick one thing intentional about and to be proximate about, because none of us can do everything. I can't do what you two do. I'm just one person.
Amen. Wow.
That's good.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
God bless you, Sister Marlena. I depending on the day, I don't have much hope. So, but the weird part is, I feel like almost every time I've been asked to speak on issues of justice or race or something, and in a white context, there's this appeal at the end for hope, like help us to feel better, and I don't always know how to do that, honestly. But what you said is really right on the money, and I wanted to agree with you on the Romans passage, because sometimes I think we might feel people need information, and if they have information, they'll make better decisions. But it's really transformation. And when you got to the Romans passage, it made me think of that we need to have our minds renewed, right? And this whole transformation you're talking about, because there's so many books out there. I mean, there's so much out there where people could actually learn the history. They could learn what injustice, but really there needs to be a transformation. Yeah. And your point about proximity, I'll say amen to that. One illustration that might bring it to light is in the movie Black Panther, and I always like this scene because it's when King T'Challa is incapacitated, and his mother and sister and and they the queen, you know, they go to the Jabari tribe to get help. And then this white guy, Agent Ross, starts talking like to explain the situation, and the Jabari tribe start barking, and they bark so loud that he has to stop talking, and they tell him, we don't need you to talk here. And I wanted to get up in the movie theater and cheer, because so many times I've had this, you know, kind of the white splaining thing where our voice gets minimized or gets reinterpreted or something like that. And maybe there's a place for the Agent Rosses of Christianity to kind of keep their mouths shut and to learn some things, and then for us to join in solidarity, which also happens in the movie, to join in solidarity to take down the evil and to stand up for the way of Jesus. So I like what you're saying. That gives me hope. So thank you.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. The proximity is really important. It's been important for me. I knew that when we moved from Minneapolis down to Alabama, the thing that the Lord wanted me to keep learning was to be in proximity to African Americans and be involved with their churches so that I could keep learning and learn in a place where racism was far more obvious than the way we hid it under Minnesota Nice. And I have benefited greatly by some amazing people that just gently lead me along, and they're the voices in my life, and I'm just grateful for that. One more thing, if I could just, you've mentioned a couple of things, and I know reading isn't the only thing, but for some people, there are those key books or those key resources that are extremely useful. The one that set me in motion several years back was Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. That just was a key turner for me, and really helped. And then Dennis, I remember being in your church one time, and you referred to a book by Willie Jennings, I believe it was, on just the way that. Say that again.
Christian Imagination, maybe.
Yes, that was it. And so what are maybe a couple of key books, and you've mentioned a couple of them, and if you just want to bring them up again, that would be fine, but maybe a couple of books that would just help me and learn. I'm one of those Enneagram 5s. I'm just a learner. But for others that could be listening too, because sometimes it's those keys that really help with data or story that means something. So what might be some things?
Well, the things that turned me, there's a lot of good books and out right now, but some of the things that turned me, just maybe not what you expected me to say, but like just thinking about, like I read church history, Justo Gonzalez's church history. And I'm just like, remember that Christianity moved from North Africa and Palestine this way.
Yes.
So listen to what, and a lot of the people were people of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think about Moses the Black and just other people in the early church. Feel like Saint Basil the Great and his brother Gregory, and just John Chrysostom nails so many things about like what we're supposed to do with our money and how we're supposed to treat people.
Good.
So I love Justo Gonzalez. I'm missing the name of the book. I can picture it right in my head. But his
it's a 2-volume work. It's like the history of Christianity.
Yes, there we go. On church history of Christianity. And I remember being really when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X and Howard Thurman's. So I'm going a little bit back, but Jesus and the Disinherited. And so, and then all these, there's a lot of really, you mentioned Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, Ta-Nehisi Coates. There's just a lot of really good stuff. But all that helps me like frame it. And I also really like Cornel West. So
oh goodness,
listening to him. So
oh my goodness, yeah.
Any of his videos.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember listening to one on Audible a while back, and he read it. Boy, that was just so impactful for me as well. I completely agree with Cornel West on your how he's taught.
And there's also church mothers, so I don't want to say it's all guys.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's learning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I got to get Marlena to create a bibliography, because that was some really good stuff that you just
Yeah.
That was really good.
There's a good bibliography there.
I'm sitting here struggling about stuff, and she rattled off so many books.
Oh, I tell you. But name the Willie Jennings book again, too, Pastor.
Well, he's actually got a few, but the
Yeah.
main one is called The Christian Imagination, and where he traces really the legacy of slavery and its impact on Europeans, on Christians, and then eventually, of course, in the Americas. I'll admit it's a hard read, because
it's a tough read. It's academic.
Academic, right? But he has a more popular essay. In fact, there's a book that's sitting right here next to me, so that's perfect timing.
There you go.
It's a series of essays that were delivered as talks at Fuller Seminary called "Can White People Be Saved?"
Good.
And he's got an essay in there which is much more accessible and is helpful, kind of break some things down. So thinking of Jennings, but there's so, I mean, I would just go to our Sister Marlena's list there. I mean, there are books designed to help white Christians, I think about some issues like incarceration. So my friend Dominique Gilliard has a Thinking, Incarceration, which is helpful. I have another friend, Drew Hart. He wrote a book called The Trouble I've Seen, that talks about racism and hopefully a path forward for Christians. So there's a couple of more recent books that are by Christians. And then Lisa Sharon Harper, just to mention her book, The Very Good Gospel, is very helpful, because it addresses a broad range of issues and how God's shalom is meant to break through into those. So I would mention her book a lot, because that's a very accessible book, but
it really is.
Very thoughtful book, though.
Yeah. I'd like to also mention just out D.L. Mayfield's book, The Myth of the American Dream. She has just knocked it out of the park with that one. She's a good voice as well.
I just got that yesterday.
Yeah, it's a good deep work of story and just getting at these pillars of what we have held up as American value and compare those to the kingdom. And
and also say, Brenda Salter McNeil has a new book out, Austin Channing Brown, and
her book,
and Sheila Wise Rowe. Just there's a lot of African American women that have a lot of good things to say. I am slowly. I haven't read all the books right now because I'm
right.
But
it's a big stack.
And some of them have just come out, like DL's book. So I mean, I just got it yesterday. But yes, there's a lot of people that have good things to say.
I agree.
And what I appreciate with both of you is the voice that I'm hearing more is much more honest and pointed, and that's why I asked you all specifically, because I know that there are times where we're hesitant, and Dennis, I know that comes sometimes with the era we've grown up in. But I know you're so honest and so direct and loving at the same time. And Marlena, I get that from you as well in your interaction, and that I follow you on social media and things. Is there's a directness, and there is a need to be direct.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks. And I appreciate your heart, Dan, and that you want to help the church move forward. And I think that's what we all want. I think the one word that struck me a lot is the word solidarity. And I have found that I used to use the word unity, and unity I thought was a great word, but it started to feel passive. Like it just meant that we needed to be near each other. But that proximity is supposed to turn into something. It's not just. So even multicultural churches were happy just to get different colored people sitting in the pews, and maybe it's good for a snapshot or a brochure, but it didn't actually change the ethos of the place, it did, or of the gathering. And there's books. There's a book that takes another, just to mention that, called The Elusive Dream, and by Corey Edwards, Corey with a K. And she says, you know, even in multiracial churches with ethnic minority leadership, it can still function like a white church because you make decisions to not alienate the white folks who are there. So you still have that power, you know, dynamic. Anyway, I guess what I'm saying is I hope that we can move forward and that there is some momentum that happens when we come together. So I like the word solidarity for that reason.
That's a good word. Yeah, that's a good word. Well, I just want to thank both of you again for your time, your hearts, and the words. I am deeply grateful for your voices in my life. Glad that they're there, and look forward just to hopefully more conversation along the way, but also better conversation along the way that can be much more hopeful. So thank you both very much.
God bless you.
It's a joy to be with you in the kingdom.
Yeah, bless you all.